welcome back to this channel. I'm Spellsinger and I'm going to review a new series of books, the Way of the Tiger game books. And this review is going to bring you the origin, first of all, origin story for this series so you can understand where this derived from. Then I'll move on to the blurb. I've got my copy here, so I'll read the blurb to you. Move on to the plot, give you an idea about what's happening in this adventure. Then talk a little bit about the game mechanics and the adventure sheet for this book. I'll run the artwork through the video so you can see what's going on and how it differs from the Fighting Fantasy series. And then I'll talk a bit about my likes and dislikes, maybe give a fun fact before a summary and score. And maybe at the end I'll give a shout out as well. But without further ado, this is, the title for this one is The Way of the Tiger. And this is book 0. This is Ninja. And the way this has worked is back in the 80s. This series of books came out, book 1 to 6. And those were written by Jamie Thompson and Mark Smith. And then it ended. So it ended at book 6. Back in 2014, a fellow by the name of David Walter, who wrote this one, he got in touch with Jamie Thompson and Mark Smith, and between the three of them, they agreed to bring about a prequel, so book 0, which is this one, and also a final book 7 to round off the series, which is why we have this book here. Now, this is a really great entry, and it really brings you into the world nicely. So let's start with this origin story. The Way of the Tiger, it was a series of game books, like I mentioned, originally by Mark Smith and Jamie Thompson. And it was published by Night Books back in 1985. It was set on the fantasy world of Orb. And the reader takes part of a young ninja called Avenger. So unlike the Fighting Fantasy series, you're not actually yourself, but you do play a character, this Avenger. And you're on a quest, basically, to avenge your foster father's murder and recover some stolen scrolls. The later books presented other challenges for Avenger to overcome, most notably taking over and ruling a city, but you began right at the start by avenging your father. The world of Orb was originally created by Mark Smith for a Dungeons & Dragons game as a pupil in 1970, or in the 1970s, I think it was early 70s. Orb was also used for the setting of a Fighting Fantasy game book, The Talisman of Death, which, if you check my other playlists, the Puffin Fighting Fantasy playlist, you'll see that review in there. Each of these books has a disclaimer right at the start, and it's against sort of any performing of these ninja-related moves in these books. Basically because they could lead to serious injury and death. In fact, I think I've got a copy of it here. Yeah, so this is the little warning that they give you. Do not attempt any of the techniques or methods described in this book. They could result in serious injury or death to the untrained user. So there you go, a little disclaimer just to cover themselves. The 6th book from the original series was created by, like I say, by Smith and Thompson. It was called Inferno, and it ended on a cliffhanger. So bearing that in mind, I think it caused a little bit of unrest. There was a lot of disgruntled fans, and so based on that, I think if I remember rightly, Avenger, your character, he's trapped in the web of the Black Widow, Orb's darkest blight. And as no new books were released, the fate of Avenger and Orb was basically unknown. Mark Smith then confirmed that the cliffhanger was intentional. That ending was how it was intended to end, but there was a lot of upset people about it. So. And then in August 2013, the original creators, like I said, of the series, working with Megara Entertainment, developed this hardcore cover collection, sort of collector's editions of the game books. So they re-released all the original ones, real nice looking ones. And this included the new prequel, Ninja, book 0, and this sequel, book 7, Redeemer. The 2 books plus the 6 re-edited original books were reprinted in 2014 and then made available, I think, on PDF in 2019, I think it was. So yeah, really nice, and I recommend these. Don't worry too much about the old books; they're too expensive on eBay. But grab these new ones; they're great. Where the Tiger original creators, they sort of have this Avenger character who's typically very powerful, and you sometimes think, well, maybe too powerful to evoke much empathy. But Avenger lived in a world that contained sort of monstrous evil. And it was such a difficult task ahead of the character that even with all his powers, he's still vulnerable. His quest was also deeply personal to him, and it was easy to get caught up in that story. You kind of really want to succeed and see it through to the end. The Way of Tigers also introduced a spiritual aspect to the books, where Avenger would receive dream visions from the gods, or have a spiritual battle with a demon in a kind of meditative trance or state. But simply put, it was deeper than the other game books of that time. Orb was a fun place to explore. It had a good place to spend time in, and the quality of the writing of the Way of the Tiger series is very high. It's a very good standard. It had a good use of language. It didn't really appear that much in the game books of that time. They were maybe some of the green spine fighting fantasy books. When you compare the two, you can really see the differences in this series. Anyway, that's a short origin story. So let me read the blurb to you, so you can see what's happening in this one. This is the Covenant of the Ninja, the Way of the Tiger, taught to you by slain foster father Naikishi. Before you were ever known as Avenger, before your quest for vengeance would change the world of Orb, you were to face the great evil in the idyllic island of Plenty. You are the youngest of 5 initiates of Inner Circle Challenge to become Grandmaster of the 5 Winds. Your journey would lead you from ancient cities across towering mountains and into wild forests. There is evil stirring in these lands, determined to destroy you and your allies, and it shall turn your challenge into the greatest ordeal you have ever faced. Okay, so the plot for this entry, the events of this book, they take place after the scrolls of Ketsuin are stolen in Book 1, Avenger, but before you set out to get them back. So you and 4 other Quan worshippers, and Quan is your god, basically. You're a kind of mixture of monks and ninjas. You go to this island, the Island of Plenty, in order to compete in a series of tasks and tests to become the Grandmaster. These tests involve infiltrating certain buildings and stealing flags from them, which I think you've got to do twice. So you need 2 of these flags to accomplish your mission. It's not a particularly difficult task in itself. The trick is competing more against the fellow students and to beat them, race against time to get these flags and reach the other end of the island before they do. As soon as you land, however, it turns out that the place where the first flag is held has been taken over by Ronan, who's this evil fella. And there's this mystery at the heart of the book. Someone is trying to kill off all the Quan worshippers. And it's up to you, basically, and your 4 companions to find out who it is and then try to stop them. So you arrive on boat with this one purpose, to get these flags. But as you progress, other things become apparent, and there's more than meets the eye. Right, game mechanics and adventure sheet. Combat in this entry is made up of kicks, punches, and throws, where kicks are harder to perform, but they deal more damage, while throws alone will cause no damage but leave your opponent vulnerable. Combat works with your enemy having a defense number against your attack. And if you score more than this, you consult the damage dice and roll accordingly. So basically, like I say, a punch will deal a certain amount of damage, a kick will give a certain amount of damage +2 because it's a stronger move, and that throw will set you up for a punishing blow if you're successful. You also get modifiers to contribute to this. So basically, if you imagine you learn a new punch or a new kick, you can increase your modifier by 1. So effectively increasing your damage that you cause by 1. So a really good little attribute to this style of fighting. So yeah, also blocking. As well as the modifiers, you've got the ability to block. So if you do receive an attack and before you take the damage, you can try and block that attack. And if you block it, then you'd receive no more damage. But if you don't block it, you leave yourself open for the next round, so you'll be slightly disadvantaged. So that works really well as well. That's a nice mechanic. Your endurance is like your stamina of the Fighting Fantasy series. Starts at 20, if it hits 0, it's game over. You also get what they call inner force. Inner force starts at 3, and what it allows you to do is if you say to yourself, I'm going to use inner force for the next move, if you have a good feeling about that move and you think you could be successful in pulling that move, then if you do and you are successful, you basically double any damage you make. So it could be a killing blow. It could be the difference between that or a killing blow. If you fail to make the attack, you still lose that point of inner force. But it's a really nice addition to have. And the other thing I wanted to mention was fate. So similar to the testing of luck of the Fighting Fantasy books, you have fate. And in this, basically, when you have a situation that involves fate or luck, you basically roll the dice, and if you get between 7 and 12, you're fortunate or you're lucky and you'll do okay. If you're unfortunate, bad things will happen. There's a whole list of ninja tools and skills, which I'll touch on in a moment, and shurikens, all kinds of like ninja type things that you would expect to be in this book are there to be used. The author, Waters, he's done a really good job with this. There's a lot of fun stuff with the combat system. He did a great job with that. The way the Tiger system is simple, but it utilizes a range of options that people might technically forget about. So there are combats where you need to use your inner strength to increase damage that you deal as you have a certain number of rounds. Then there's other combats where blocking is useful. And then there are combats where you can use shurikens and poison needles. And there's also a combat where you can use nothing but throws. So this book really brings you into the combat system nicely and kind of gets you used to using all the different techniques and not forgetting about them. And it will set you up nicely for the rest of the series as well. Adventure sheet. Right, adventure sheet here is drastically different from anything that we've seen before compared to the Fighting Fantasy series. So if you look carefully, you've got your punch, kick and throws in the top left there, and your fate modifier sits underneath, so you just fill that in. Just to the right of that, you have the shurikens. You start off with a certain number of shurikens, and then you have your inner force below that. And endurance, and then to the right of that, I mentioned the ninja tools. So you've got a whole list of things like breathing tubes, flash powder, a garrote, and these are all used throughout the story. Most of these items will remain with you throughout your adventure, but some of them can be used and used once or lost or broken, so things to keep note of basically. And then at the bottom you have the notes and special items. So it is a really good adventure sheet and everything is there that you need. It differs slightly in this edition. This one here is actually the original standard one from the 80s, but essentially it's the same. Okay, the artwork. Now, there was a whole host of illustrators for this book, which I will put up. I'll put up a list of the illustrators here. I'm not going to rattle through those. So it wasn't just one or two involved in this book. It was a whole host of them, and it's ever so slightly different to what we're used to. It gives a more of what I would say a clip art feel to the sort of computer generated art that was quite popular, especially around this sort of 2014, 2013 time. If you look at a lot of the Fighting Fantasy books around that time, they have a very similar style. That line art has gone, and this has been replaced by this kind of computerized look. The new art takes away some of the magic from these books. I always felt you kind of lose that draw a little bit. That kind of pull into the story is gone, which is a bit of a shame. But I still have a favourite picture though. This one here, it's quite atmospheric. You've got the barge and you've got this kind of mist pulling in from the street. I do like it. I don't mind it. I mean, I prefer the original line art, obviously. But I don't mind it that much. But this one, of all the images, I think is a good, strong one. And it kind of harks back to the old days. Okay, likes and dislikes for this entry. I really like the effort that Walters put into this book. There's lots of nods to the original stories, and he really did his homework on this one. And it shows in all of this sort of related comments and events that follow in the remaining series. So you'll be reading along, and because I know the originals so well, I'll be reading this book, and I'll get to a reference and I'll think, oh yeah, I remember that happening later on. And you get to another reference and you think, so that's how that came about. You know, it does tie up quite nicely, and he must have spent some time with the original authors setting out his plans. He did a really good job. I like that. I don't have any dislikes as such. There's not really anything to dislike about this book. It's a nice, simple introduction into that world of Orb. Fun facts. Where the Tiger made history and defined kind of childhood for many, including myself, it's also left unfinished. Mark and Jamie, they released these revised versions, like I mentioned, Where the Tiger. They printed them in this nice deluxe collectible edition with full colour, new art. It was inspired by the original, edits, new edits, revisions, and any errors they fixed. Noticeably though, to revise book 6 with author approval, there was this increased dimension and nice hardback coverings. But I think maybe the real reason behind the whole thing was because there was such an uproar over the ending of that book 6 that book 7, Redeemer, was really needed to kind of calm all those angry guys that are hurtling towards 50 that read these back in the day. So, yeah, there's a fun fact. Okay, a summary and score for this entry. Walters, he did a great job in tying in this prequel to the rest of the series. It's a difficult thing to do, as there are 6 books, original books worth of events that Walters can't tamper with by introducing characters too early or playing around with events that have already happened. And there's similar faces as well. There's a fellow called Gorobei, the monks of the Scarlet Mantis, and they all show up in this book. And you will meet them later on in the originals. The characters are really well written and really fleshed out nicely. They're well thought out. And upon learning of these attempts on your life, your character kind of blames Yeaman, who is the big boss. He's the big boss in the original series. He's the one that kills your foster father. So you've got this kind of background history. And understandably, considering that he did kill your stepfather, there's this kind of difference in the attitude between the monks and the ninjas, which demonstrates their sort of different approach. And that comes across really well in this book too. Ninja is an extremely well-crafted and atmospheric game book, with about the right level of difficulty as well, as numerous interesting characters, and it kind of reminds me of Steve Jackson's sorcery epic, starting with the Shaman-Tanti Hills. And those of you that have read that book, I found that a brilliant entry book into his world, in the same way that Walters has sort of created this new entry into the world of Orb. I always kept thinking about the Shaman-Tanti Hills when I was reading this book. So yeah, brilliant effort. And he really gave high consideration to the need to preserve, the protagonist's character, while throwing in subtle references to the future path that the character would eventually take. It's a valid prequel. It doesn't undermine the books that took place chronologically in the future. And having these 5 cities and these flags, which can be won, it worked really well, with each city having lots of valid choices and kind of like a character to themselves. Ninja is an adequate prequel. It's an outstanding game book. It's not too difficult. And in book 2, Assassin, there's a vague reference is made to the ninja's previous adventures on the Island of Plenty. And of course now, with the addition of this prequel, you get to play that. And you get to play that adventure. So that's a really nice feature. It's also refreshing to see that bloke I mentioned, Gorobei. He's the opponent in Avenger, book 1. He's like the first guy you beat, or you have to try and beat him to become a worshipful master. And in this one, he's more fleshed out. He's more than a simple opponent. You get to sort of know him a bit better, and it brings a more personal element to the story. And of course, he shows up quite a lot in the later series, so his history is more meaningful with the entry of this book. It's also interesting to see how the ninja acquires the blood of Neil. Do you remember in that character sheet there was one of the ninja tools with the blood of Neil, and you kind of just start with it. But in this book, you find out how you actually acquire it. So it's in your starting equipment, and you kind of take it for granted in that book one. And all the other books, but yeah, here you find out how you actually got hold of it. So I won't tell you, spoil it, but it's good. It's a good little feature. And the same goes for the atonement of inner force. You start this book with 3, but you start book 1 with 5, and at the end of this book, you'll find out how you sort of learn to expand on your inner force. So, yeah, really nice little features, and all that tied up with the artwork and the strong narrative, and the rich prose, and the effort that went into making this one work as a prequel. I'll have to give it a 7 out of 10 because it's a very strong book. It works standalone as well if you're not bothered about reading the others, but to read it as a story arc is just brilliant. Okay, a shout out. There's a fella on YouTube by the name of Raphael Perry, and at the time of recording this video, he must be working through book 3 of this of the Way of the Tiger series. Book 3 is called Usurper, and he basically does these little recordings. He has a PDF of the book, and he'll read through it and try and complete them. He's really good. He has a great voice for these books. He's a lot of fun. So Raphael Perry, is worth checking him out. And if you like this video, then you'll love what he does. Yeah, he's obviously really into it, and he's a bit of a gamer. So his channel is mostly sort of gaming, but these books are on there as well. So worth a look. Okay, I think that wraps up pretty much on what I wanted to say for this book. So if you liked it, maybe give it a thumbs up, maybe share it if you think someone else might like it, and leave a comment. And what I'll do is I will try and review the original book 1, Avenger, from 1985, I think it was. I'll try and do that next week. But in the meantime, I hope you enjoyed this, and I'll see you soon.